Hello and welcome to our webinar, Google Analytics for Business-to-Business Lead Generation and Optimization. We are very sorry, or I am very sorry, that we had to move this date for the webinar, but unfortunately I was homesick at the original time and could not make it. However, it is very exciting for us to see how many of you are here with us today, and I hope that the next 30 approximately minutes will give you something of value. Our focus today will be on the actual usage and goal setting for Google Analytics rather than the technical setup. So, and if that is something that you want to know more about or want our help with, so please just contact me after the meeting and we will see what we can do. So, some of you might know me from our previous webinar about Always On, but I would like to introduce myself. My name is Sophie Simonsson, and I work as a consultant manager for paid media here at Bright Vision. Before joining Bright Vision crew and when working here, I have many years of experience with creating and analyzing digital strategies. And so I do have a very vast experience of just focusing on lead follow-up, on conversion rates, on conversion frequency, and making sure that all of the efforts is working as good as they actually can with the help of Google Analytics. Together with a gang at Bright Vision, who is expert at leads generation in business to business, I've dug a little deeper in what kind of data our clients do have, or kind of data that they might have or can have if they just put up tracking on it. And we have talked about how we can make sure that that data is used in the best possible way. And now we want to share that analysis with you. Our agenda today is to do a quick introduction on Google Analytics in general, and then go more in depth on what we can track, measure, and which metric and reports to use. We will then talk more about how to interpret the data and optimize the campaign thereafter. We will also talk about the 3 tools to use together with Google Analytics, and in the end, we will have a short Q&A on it in about 5 minutes. So, as promised, we will start with an introduction to Google Analytics. Many of you probably know what Google Analytics is and is already using it. But for those who are working with other systems or do not have analytics implemented on their site at the moment, we will start off easy. So, Google Analytics is the world's biggest analysis tools for website. The rumor is, even though it's not confirmed from Google officially, that the tool is now used by over 30 million sites around the world. And the reason for this amount of users is that the tool is free and it works simply by creating an account and adding a tag or script to your website, making it possible for the script and for the tool and your site to talk to each other. And the service is very simple. Track your visitors and learn more about your customer journey and what works and do not work in your advertising or your setup to find possibilities for optimization. To be able to use Google Analytics for optimization towards your leads, you need to know what you actually can track in Google Analytics and how to track your goals. There is no general answer to what you should track when it comes to lead and conversions, but what you should track is obviously affected by what you think is important. In short, the most important thing that you can track is to track what you want to know. So, but I would say that a good start when it comes to identifying your goals is to identify the purpose of your website. Is it simply getting leads, or is it also about the journey from visitor to lead? Is it about selling products, getting completed forms, publishing and getting readers for article or blog posts? Is it getting people to sign up for newsletters or ask for quotes? Or is it all of these things, but in different pages? Once you have decided what is important on your website and what you want your users to do, it is time to go into Google Analytics and set up the actual tracking there. Something we do by setting goals. In a Google Analytics account, you have a maximum of 20 goals. You do have a lot to work with. So what we need to do now is simply transform your goals into something that Google Analytics can measure, a Google Analytic goal. And in Google Analytics, there are 4 different types of goals. We have destination goals, duration goals, goals per pages or pages per session, and event goals. And we need to understand these 4 different types of goals so that we can streamline our lead generation using Google Analytics. And we need to see where our goals fit into the Google Analytics goals so that we actually measure our goal. If we start with talking about the destination goal, these are a way to track specific URLs. This type of goal is perfect when you have thank you pages, confirmation pages, or PDF links. And the only thing you need to do is actually put a URL into Google Analytics, but where every visit to that URL will be counted as a goal or conversion. For B2B companies who generally want to produce leads, this is the most common type of goal where you simply add the URL from thank you pages to Google Analytics. We then have our duration goal. Our duration goal can be used to track how many of your visitors stay on your site for a certain amount of time. This can be useful, for example, when you have a goal such as, I want people to read my blog post. By estimating how long time it takes for someone to read your blog post, you can then set a duration goal to see how many people actually stays that time or longer on a specific page. Therefore, you can see how many are actually fulfilling your goal of reading the article. The third goal, pages per session. Sorry, pages per session are very similar to our duration goal, but it allows you to measure how many pages a visitor has displayed before leaving your site. This is probably the least used goal in lead generation, but I think you should still have it in mind when putting your goals up because it is a good way to measure engagement on your site. For example, some advertised campaigns that you will do or some sources that you use will not always be a main participant in actually fulfilling your lead generation, but they can still give you valuable traffic that shows engagement by visiting 3, 4, 5 pages, and therefore still could be very valuable for you because next time they enter the page, they might convert. Our last type of goal is event goal. These are a bit more advanced as it's up to you to define the events that you want to track and also the implementation. In all of the other goals, you simply add URLs or you simply put in how you want people to stay or how many pages they should visit. But here you also need to add some JavaScript code to your actual page to tell Google Analytics what you want to track. Event goals are very versatile and the code makes it easy to track whatever you want. For example, you can track a call to action button that doesn't lead to a thank you page. You can track how long someone is watching a video. You can track how often someone clicks on an external link or any kind of links or buttons on your page. So for example, if you do have a lead generation form on your page, but you do not have a thank you page, you could use this event goal to put a tracking on who actually clicks on the submit button on your form. That way you could still track how many leads come from the different sources, even though you're not using a thank you page. So when you have decided on your goals and then compare them to the possibilities in Google Analytics and then implemented your goal, I would also recommend that you prioritize among your goals internally, partly to know what to prioritize when you actually look at the data and have optimizations possibilities, but also to know if you look at your advertising, which goal is the most fulfilling or gives you the most return on investment. So now that we have our goal set, we need to choose the right data to look at. Google Analytics can track and measure many different metrics and data. And if you set up your Google Analytics account yourself or are not completely familiar with all of the terms and all of the metrics, I would recommend that you take some extra time to understand what the different metrics means to be able to rightly identify what is most important to you. But in many of the Google Analytics reports, there are the same metrics, and therefore I want to talk through 6 of them with you. The first one is number of sessions. And as you might understand, this is about how many visits the site has had in total. So how many sessions have your site had? The thing with session is that it is counted per entering of the page. So if I enter the page once, I leave the page 2 minutes after that, and then I re-enter it 2 minutes after that again, that will be counted as 2 sessions, even though I did it so close to each other. And also with sessions, a session automatically ends after 30 minutes of interactivity. So for example, say I opened your web page before lunch. And then I go to lunch, which means I don't look at your page or move anything on the page for 30 minutes to 1 hour. And then I go back to my computer and I start scrolling and clicking on your page again. That would actually mean that I have 2 sessions on your site, even though in reality it might only be 1. So therefore it might be a small differ in the amount of session actually being in reality and what we see in Google Analytics. Our second metric is numbers of visitors. And that is also pretty much as it sounds. It's the amount of individuals who has visited your page. If we look at both number of sessions and number of visitors, we can compare those because one visitor can have multiple of sessions. So we will almost always have more sessions than visitors. But it is interesting to see if maybe do you have twice more sessions than visitors, or 3 or 4 or 5 times the number of sessions than visitors, just to see how often do your visitors actually visit your site. The third metric is time on site. And this is also pretty much as it sounds. It is how long an average person stay on your site. Pages per visit is how many pages an average person visit on your site. And that is both of those metrics is very interesting when looking at the engagement from the traffic. Maybe they do not convert, but they spend 3 minutes on your page and visit 5 pages. That could still be relevant traffic, even though they do not convert. This is very common when you look at Google Ads traffic. For the first visit from Google Ads, a lot of people do research. So they click around on your site and stay a long time, but maybe they are not ready to actually sign up for to be contacted. They will do that the next time. So there we have a source that could have good time on site, good pages per visit, but low conversion. And you need to see how that is worthy for you or not. Our fifth metric is bounce rate. And bounce rate is how large of a percentage of visitors who leave your page directly after entering it, or without doing any actions, without clicking on something, simply put. So if you enter a page and then you leave without doing anything, you will have 100% bounce rate. And this is an interesting metric to see how people behave on your page. However, it is interesting to remember that on some page we do want people to just enter our maybe one page landing page. We want people to enter them and we want them to leave. We don't necessarily want them to go next. So that will affect our bounce rate to look like a negative number since it's 100%, but in reality, that is actually something that we are okay with the client doing. And the sixth metric is, of course, the conversions. And these are our previously set goals. So those are the basic metrics that shows up all over Google Analytics. We do have more metrics, of course, but these are the ones that we have chosen to focus on since it is the most common and relevant ones. As we mentioned before, the data available in Google Analytics is massive. But we have selected 5 reports that we consider to be the most relevant, regardless of industry or target group or which your goals are. And that this is something that you should check regularly to get the feel of how your traffic and how your page actually is performing. The first report is called Acquisition All Traffic. Under this tab, we get a clear picture of where our traffic comes from and how it's behaved. So for example, in this report, you get all of the previous metrics that we talked about on the previous slide put into the different sources. So you can see how long the traffic from LinkedIn stay on my page, how many sessions have I had from LinkedIn, and how many conversions has I had. And you can then see all of your sources with the same metrics and compare them. This is great if you want to see, as I said, which source is performing best for you and maybe put more effort into that source. We then have acquisitions campaign. Under this tab, we have a clearer picture of how our campaigns work, which content works the best, which target groups works the best, and look at it together with which goals they actually are converting to. This tab works optimal if we use something called UTM tags on our URLs. I will talk more about that later, but it gives Google Analytics even more information about where our users are coming from. And this report is important to look at since it gives us all of the information on what is actually working best for us at the moment. And therefore we can optimize towards it. Our third report is Audience Mobile. Under this tab, you can see which unit your traffic comes from. Today, we often see that a large part of the traffic, especially when advertising, comes from mobile traffic and tablets. And in that case, it is important to actually see that your web page is optimized for the mobile traffic. It's common today that a lot of the traffic is mobile, but the web page is optimized for desktop. And that might result in you actually losing conversions since the page isn't optimized for 50% of your traffic. Our fourth report is Audience Geo. And this is pretty much as it sounds. It gives us an opportunity to see where our traffic is coming from, together with which language they are talking. So, or having in their browser. So for example, do you have 20% of your traffic coming from an English-speaking country or a Danish-speaking country, but your website is only in Swedish? Maybe you should look into having language opportunities on your page so that your users actually can pick the language they prefer. With the geography, you can see where the server for the person that you have visited your site is. And that means that if big companies often have their servers, for example, in the US, that can actually affect the geography that you are seeing, since your target group might be in the Nordics. It might be people in the Nordics who are actually clicking on your ads or visited your sites, but the geo report might show that they are visiting from the US. So don't be worried if that happens. It's probably just about the server being placed in a different location than the people actually are. But this report is a great way to just control that your traffic is in the right target group and that you are giving them the right options so that they can use your page in the right way. In all of these, then we have our behavior report, which is the actual last report that we're going to mention today. And that is a behavior flow report. This tab gets you a flow chart of all of your traffic. Which pages do they land on? What do they click on next? And where do they drop off? So you basically get a map of where people enter, where they leave, and how do they click on your page. And then you can use that data to adapt your website accordingly. For example, if you have one page where 80% drop off, where you do not want them to drop off, maybe you should look into options on actually changing that page to be more converting for you. And then, of course, in all of these reports, we can also add something that is called a secondary dimension. So if the traffic is our first dimension, but we could also add in something like campaign, content, target group, or the mobile as our secondary dimension. This basically means that we can combine two reports. So we can have all traffic and campaigns shown in the same report together with our metrics to give us even more data and see how those two, all traffic and campaigns, go together. Of course, there is a lot more to see and track, but the above reports are a good start to get a picture of the origin of your traffic and the quality of it, together with where your leads and conversions are coming from. As you move further into your Google Analytics journey, it is important to test your theories and see what works best for your company. So don't forget to actually try your thoughts out, and then you can change them back. But if you don't try them, you do not know what will work and what do not work. And before moving away from our metrics and reports, I just want to mention something about bounce rate and time on page, because those can be tricky metrics. In order for a visitor to have an estimated time on page, Google Analytics have to have a starting point. So they have to have a first action to be able to measure the time from the first action to the last action. Unfortunately, the first action is not entering the page. The first action is actually clicking on something or doing an action on the page. So if a person enters the page and do not do any action at all, Google Analytics do not have a starting point for measuring the time. So when they leave the page, they could have stayed for 30, 40, 50 seconds, but Google will say they stayed for 0 seconds. So that can have a negative effect on your numbers. So have in mind when you analyze a page, what you want them to do on the page. If you do not want them to click anything, maybe 0 time on page spent is not necessarily a bad metric, since they could have stayed for longer. The same goes for bounce rate. We actually do need a person to take action for not having 100% bounce rate. So if you have the pages where you don't want people to click on something, where you just want them to read an article, they will have a 100% bounce rate if they leave directly after that, even though they have stayed and they have read the article. So those numbers can appear negative, but don't have to be negative. And then we need to make sure that we are using the right data. So to be able to interpret and analyze your data, it is crucial to make sure that we have the correct data to start with. Therefore, it is important to control that our tracking is included on all of our pages, and that we include our conversions, that we make sure that all of the goals we have set up is actually working. When I set up a goal, I do always complete that goal myself on the web page to make sure that Google Analytics is tracking it correctly. And then we need to make sure we exclude our own IP addresses from the data, especially if we do have a lot of internal visits. An example on this, when that company I work with did not exclude their own traffic, which stood for 25% of their own traffic, they did not understand their own numbers. They had a lot of sessions, but no one converted, no one stayed long on the page, and no one visited more than 1 page per session. And they couldn't really understand why, since they thought that their web page and funnel was good. When we looked at it, they included their own traffic, and they had all of their employees having their own web page as a starting page when they opened their browsers. So since when their employees open their browsers, they didn't want to look at their own web page. They want to go to a specific page that they were after. They actually get 100% bounce rate on 25% of their visits, who wasn't even clients from or users that they were interested in knowing. So the lesson to take from that is they made changes from the wrong data. So they practically made those changes blindly. And when we corrected the data, we saw that many of those changes was actually had a negative effect instead of a positive effect. So make sure you're using the right data before taking any decisions. As I mentioned before, we like to use UTM tracking to help Google to identify more data about our visitors. Google is pretty thorough when they look at our users and take in the data, but they can't do it all. So we need to help them if we want to know it all. UTM tracking is pretty simple. We add tags to our URLs. So we tell Google, with the help of tags, where our traffic coming from is in both sources, campaigns, target groups, and ads. So we get more detailed information about which source, which campaign, which target group, ad, post everyone comes from, and what works the best. So we can see which ad gives us the conversion, which ad is giving us our leads, which ad is maybe cheapest when we look at LinkedIn marketing tool, but it doesn't give us any leads. But the most expensive ad is giving us more leads. So the CPL is actually cheaper on the more expensive click. So we need to look at it closer with the help of UTM tracking, so we can actually see the cost per lead on individual ads, campaigns, and target groups. So we can put them all together and put them against each other on all levels. We can actually make sure that we optimize towards the thing that gives us the cheapest and best qualitative leads. So we have now identified our goals. We have set up our tracking. We have decided which metrics and reports to look at. We have talked about which data to exclude and include. But how do we actually interpret the data? The most important thing to be able to interpret the data is to understand it. And therefore, it is crucial that you understand the metrics that you look at in your reports before you use it as a base for decision. So if you, after today's webinar, feel that you need to know more, I recommend you go to something called Google Academy and get to know all of the metrics, all of the names in Google Analytics better, so that the optimizations you do is on good ground. Then you need to look at your data and put it towards your goals, so we can interpret our data accordingly to our goals. Which goals, which data, or which source is giving us the most fulfilled goals? Is that the goal that is most important to us? And how can we optimize more towards that? Put our efforts towards the traffic or the campaign that is giving us most fulfilled goals. But it is also important to not stare blindly at our goals. We also need to analyze the traffic and the behavior on the site. As I mentioned before, maybe it's not always the last goal that matters all the way. Maybe it's the engagement and the behavior on the site from one source that is important as well, because maybe that source is the step before the actual conversions in our buyer's journey, and therefore should be at least as important. Then it's important for us to get our learnings, to look at the data and all the efforts that we have done in the past. Look at what you can do right now, but in the future, implement it directly. If you have one campaign where you take 3, 4, 5 learnings and optimize that campaign, have that in mind when you plan anything in the future, so you don't need to make the same optimizations and changes again and again and again. And then last but not least, compare the results after you make changes. You can put notes into Google Analytics, for example. If we make a change, we need to make sure that that change is good. So by doing that, we can actually we need to do that by looking at the specific dates. Look at the data before you made a change and compare it to the data after you made a change. It might be hard for you to remember when you did a change, but you can actually put the notes into Google Analytics at the specific dates to see, okay, this date I launched a campaign, this date I updated the landing page, this date I put in a new form, so that you easily can see why huge changes in traffic might occur. But remember to not make all the changes at once. It will be hard to figure out which changes actually worked and which did not. So instead, make small changes and follow up on them. Did they work? Great. Now you can try the next change. Did it not work? Okay, go back to your starting point and start over with a new change. But just make sure you take it step by step and do not do it all at one time, because it will be impossible for you to identify what did work and what did not work. Google Analytics is a great tool that gives us tremendous insight when used probably, but there are tools that, combined with Google Analytics, gives us both more and qualitative data. For example, Hotjar. Hotjar gives us the opportunity to produce different kinds of maps of visitors and how they behave on the site. On each page, you can track how a visitor scrolls, clicks, and move their mouse, both from a desktop perspective or a mobile perspective. This is important knowledge for you, an important complement to Google Analytics, since it can help us get a deeper understanding for why, example, our bounce rate looks as it does, or why we have a low conversion rate. Do people not scroll down to our form, or do they always click at a link that comes before our other call to action? Then we have our marketing automation systems. These often gives us great insight into how a visitor has been converted into a lead, and therefore also how our customer journey looks on our page. Google Analytics, however, gives us an insight in how people behave before and after they become a lead. So it's very interesting to compare the data from HubSpot. How is our leads behaving on our page from first entry to becoming a lead, and how do the people who are not becoming a lead behave on our page, and how can we get those to be more similar? I mean, if 30% of your data do not behave anything like the lead who actually converts, then maybe we need to try to get all of the traffic into behaving like the lead does. Thirdly, we have data, Google Data Studio. This is simply a tool for producing more illustrative and qualitative reports from your Google Analytics data. And I think it's important to use a tool like that when you need to share the data. Maybe you can't decide for yourself if you want to make a change on your website, you need to show why. Then this is a great tool to make your data more understandable so that it can have more effect. Great. That is actually the big part of it. So I just want to make some conclusions. Firstly, start with identifying your goals with your website. What is important for you is what you want to track. Then we need to translate that goal, the goals that you have with your website, into Google Analytics goals. After that, we need to identify the key metrics and that is most relevant for us and our goal, so that we always look at the right numbers. And make sure that we exclude our data from exclude our own IP addresses from the data. And use UTM tracking for a deeper tracking on ad, target group, and campaign level. It's important for you to compare the sources, to compare the campaigns and the ads, to look at what works best for your goal and also what works best for your traffic on the page. And don't be afraid to use additional tools. I always think that additional tools complement Google Analytics. They are never in competition. And in the end, analyze, test, compare, evaluate, and try again. You might not get it right the first time. And that's why it's important to always evaluate your changes so you can see if they are positive or negative. And then you can try again, either with a new change or an update of the previous ones. So that was the main part of the webinar, and now I just want to see if maybe we have some questions that have come up throughout the webinar. And I see we have one here. Let me see. What is the most common mistake people do when working with Google Analytics? Yeah, basically, I would say the most common mistakes and also the most crucial mistake is actually not tracking the right data. Either you don't have your script implemented on all of the pages, or you do not have your conversion tracking or goal tracking set up for your actual goals. So when you look at the data and you make decisions based on the data, you actually do not have the correct data or the correct information as a base, as a ground for your decisions. And that is a very easy mistake to make, because it's one of the simpler things to do, but the simpler it is, the easier it is to just forget it or skip it. But it's the most important part to get right, I think, as well, but most common way to get wrong. Good. Well, seems like I did a good job. We do not have any more questions at the moment. If you have any questions that shows up for you later on, please give me a call or email and we can talk about it in private instead. With that, I just want to say thank you for your time. If you were one of the 25 first to log on to this webinar, I will help you with the Google Analytics setup or optimization, depending on what you have today. And you will get an email tomorrow morning with the details about that. Of course, that is not something we force you to do, but it is an offer. So if you have an account you will need help with, so please just answer to that email in the morning. Great. That was all for me today. So thank you for participating, and just get back to me if you need any more information or any questions at all. You will of course get an email tomorrow with the link to this presentation if you want to share it internally or look at it again, etc. So yeah, thank you. Let me see.